In wilds beyond they speak your name with reverence and regret, for none could tame our savage souls, yet you the challenge met. Under palest watch you taught we changed, base instincts were redeemed, a world you gave to bug and beast, as they had never dreamed. Our cherished dreams you granted, and delivered more, but in dismay you found too late our desires had no end. What cost to tame our savagery? You gave your all, and then gave more, yet desires still lay unquenched. More dreams remained, your energy. Amongst it spread a dreadful scourge, that forced return our aggressive urge, and turned us back to beasts or husks, our souls consumed to the light above. Within your corpse can still be heard the plaintive cries of one, who took our pain and loss and dreams inside itself too. Through its pain we found a truth that must now be confessed, for nothing can contain such things but perfect emptiness. If somebody strapped me to a chair and put a gun to my head, I know that was a major tonal shift, right? But if they did, and they ordered me to keep just one game from the last generation, I'd pick Hollow Knight without question. Hell, I'd probably pick Hollow Knight if there wasn't a gun to my head. It's Hollow Knight. Hollow Knight is my game of last generation. Spider-Man is spectacular, Hellblade is finely crafted, but there's something so fascinating about Hollow Knight. This is the toughest critique I've done yet, because this game has no flaws aside from some minor nitpicks. None. Zero. It's a perfect game in its own right, never mind the astonishing value for money it possesses. And to top it all off, it has the best core fanbase of any game I've played. I haven't seen any toxicity, any get goods, just some badass fan art and warm, welcoming arms wrapped around new players. I know, we've just started the video and there I go front-loading my arguments again, but I don't really care this time. Hollow Knight is a miracle of a video game, and if you've played it, you know exactly why. Exploring Hallownest is one of those sensations which I struggle to put into words. But in this video, I'm going to try, somehow, whilst also dropping some lore tidbits that I find particularly interesting. And I'll be unpicking some of the flaws I've heard rattled off by the unwashed while we go. Sweet Mary Mother of Joseph, what have I got myself into? Spoilers ahead.
Bapanada.
What makes a good Metroidvania? You might not realise this, but it's actually a silly question. Commonly we see Metroidvania described as a genre, but it's not. It's a specific set of mechanics. Ari Gibson and William Pellin, the game's creative directors, have even tried to distance themselves from the term during Hollow Knight's initial marketing because, well, they were scared of making Hollow Knight look like it was, quote, just another indie Metroidvania. So what are these specific mechanics? To describe them is like describing two wide sides of a coin, but thankfully for us, Josh Beiser explores them in his piece Making Sense of Metroidvania Game Design. I'll link it below, but he argues that there are two distinct facets which are used here, building a better hero and opening up the world as we explore. Now, poor Metroidvania mechanics would simply give the player a key to open up the world. For example, in Dark Souls 2, areas of the game are artificially gated away from the player until you get to the King's Ring. Or a tool which only has one particular use, like in Ocarina of Time. Getting the long shot doesn't change how we tackle earlier parts of the game, it's focused on particular temples. Opening up more of the world through new abilities and gear should also influence how we see the world, from the opening sections right through to mid-game secrets. It keeps the game world feeling naturalistic, rather than artificial. Like these spaces are timeless, have always existed, and will continue to exist long after we put the game down, waiting to be explored. With this level design, while the space is arguably not open due to limiting access based on mechanics, there still should be a sense of choice. If the path through the game is too heavy-handed in how the player is guided, it removes player agency, one of the most important feelings a player can have in a game using Metroidvania mechanics. There should always be at least 2 or 3 different areas that the player can explore at any given time once they're let loose on the world. This is all important for building a better hero. Not only does the player feel like their hero has grown stronger through their intrinsic understanding of the game world and how best to navigate it, but the new abilities they unlock as they explore make their hero feel physically better. We're not just talking about strength either, robotically grinding to level up so you can tackle gated regions a la the new Assassin's Creed games, but through the hero becoming more adept at tackling challenges you may have struggled with earlier by using new, useful abilities. For another example, look at Salt and Sanctuary, which if you haven't played already, I highly recommend. It's bloody brilliant. We're not talking about simple weapon upgrades, but new mechanics. A double jump, being able to stick to ceilings, and so on. The easiest way to track if a game is using truly informed Metroidvania mechanics is by starting a new playthrough. If you're immediately aware of how depowered your character is in movement as well as combat, you can trace how strong the progression was when you first jumped into the game world. Okay, so why are we doing this? Why am I wasting your time by discussing Metroidvania as a concept before the little knight even lands in Hallownest? Well, Hollow Knight isn't just a Metroidvania. It presents itself as so much more, especially in the opening moments of the game. But it also tutorializes building a better hero and opening up the world supremely well in its opening few minutes. Let's get into the game, shall we? Just 1 second into Hollow Knight, the game already teaches the player that you can't take fall damage here by dropping the knight from a great height and crashing into the underground. The caverns at first seem ominous and oppressive. The twinkling of the piano in the background has been purposefully faded out to be replaced by a distant, echoing whistling, like the cold wind is blowing through these dusty ruins. I wouldn't be diving deep into each area of the game, honestly if I did we'd be here for hours, but the game wants us to inhale its opening moments slowly, so it's only right we do so here. This entire first section is littered with secret doorways. The game is physically teaching the player that there are hidden spaces to uncover through the simple action of thwacking our nail at stones, and repetition is used here to reinforce this game mechanic. The player realizes they have the ability to smash walls when they're forced to crunch through 5 doorways, meaning we're inclined to search for these doorways during the rest of our playtime. The game is telling us immediately that the world will open up through our intuition, and by capitalizing on the systems it has already given us from the beginning. This is one of the things which, I believe, sets Hollow Knight aside from other games using Metroidvania mechanics. From the get-go, with a swift swing of our tiny sword nail, we can immediately open up new areas to explore and uncover secrets within Hallownest. I've taken issue with a few of the things Joseph, praise be to our video essay god, Anderson stated in his own critique of the game though, particularly this idea that Hollow Knight should have started the player off with the dash ability already a part of our moveset. I firmly believe that this would have been a mistake. The opening of Hollow Knight, slowly creeping towards the entrance to Hallownest, fighting very low-level enemies and learning the basics of how we will explore this world, slows us right down. Comparing how a player explores in the first third of the game to how they will explore in the final third is night and day where speed is concerned, and Team Cherry are determined for the player to feel the rubble beneath our feet as we hop from tiny platform to tiny platform, to breathe in the dusty depths, for a new player to read every lore tablet, tutorializing the mechanics, and having the ability to dash around the space would have completely removed this sense of steadiness, of purposeful slowness. Atmosphere is more important to Hollow Knight in its opening hour. It's more relaxed than, say, Dead Cells, which has you hacking and slashing and dying within mere seconds. Oh god, Instead, Hollow Knight hits you with some lore, a hand-drawn cutscene, a long drop, and some slow-paced exploration. The game wants you to drink in Hallownest, to be curious about its world and its adorable characters. If we had the dash mechanic from the beginning, we would find our way up and out of the entrance area within 15 or so seconds. We'd ignore the traps and trials that we initially experience in the form of stalagmites, whatever. Instead, the player is enraptured in the weighty few minutes it takes to carefully take in the platforms and the pace of low-level enemies, because many of the combat challenges, particularly bosses in the first half of the game, require our reaction times to be at their peak, and for jumping rather than dashing to be at the forefront of our strategy. In other words, it hones the player's combat strategy, which they will need to use for the rest of the game. Nowhere is this sense of embedding the feel of the world in our very psychology greater than in Dirtmouth. A gargantuan sealed door that we have to break down opens Hallownest up to us, and already questions are beginning to form. Why is the rest of the world sealed away from travellers? What happened here that the kingdom had to be locked away from the outside? Now, despite its dark, gloomy blue colour palette, Dirtmouth is immediately warm to us. The Elderbug calmly welcomes us, happy to have a friend in his loneliness, and if you just charge right past him, he even grumbles meekly and reaches out to you, encouraging you to talk to him and hear about the next steps. The closed shops and buildings are initially depressing, but signs are up telling us that they'll be open soon. For a lack of a main objective, this is actually the first quest the game gives us, explained to us purely through how Dirtmouth makes us feel when we enter. Find residents to populate this little town. As a hub area, Dirtmouth is small and quaint. It was once a bustling little village, which was part of the kingdom of Hallownest, being a respite for travellers to and from the kingdom. As the age of the Pale King and the Radiance became more intoxicating, bugs were drawn away from here one by one through the promise of wealth, glory, or enlightenment, leaving just the Elderbug, who wisely stayed behind like a kindly sage, welcoming travellers and acting as a guide in their path. Rebuilding Dirtmouth is one of the ways the game makes the knight feel more experienced in the world. Recruiting more characters to your personal little team makes you feel more in touch with the world, like your actions have distinct consequences, giving Hallownest a little bit of hope once again, and separating the sense of gloomy melancholy with one of optimism, especially when we see characters begin to interact with each other and remark on the growing presence in the town. Of course, just because we've made it to Dirtmouth does not mean that the game is done tutorializing itself to us. Diving into the Forbidden Crossroads, our first official area, and exploring, it's not long until the player finds their first mechanically useful NPC, Cornifer the Cartographer, everyone's favourite nerdy little bloodsucker. Prior to finding him, the game is determined to force the player into mapping out the Forbidden Crossroads in their mind, gradually linking areas together whilst becoming more intimate with this open area which connects much of Hallownest back. The area is layered with spike pits for us to fall into, adding a new dimension to how we've previously understood fall damage. The enemies are purposefully lacking in their sense of threat, more obstacles to get past than thinking, feeling enemies who react to our attacks. The backgrounds seem to be painted off into the distance, particularly with the Garpeeds, where we can see them rumbling away, giving the world a true sense of depth, like if the camera switched we could find ourselves in a maze-like 3D world with pits and threats around every corner. It's likely a player will stumble across the Temple of the Black Egg, considering it's placed just to the right of the entrance. The grand majesty of the space will scream final boss to the player like a creator simping for subs, like and subscribe by the way, and if that doesn't do it, presumably the friendly NPC called Quirrell, scratching his chin and mulling over what might be inside the egg, is enough to set some synapses firing. The lack of a map immediately connects the player and player character through their sense of getting lost, and Cornifer is appropriately placed deep enough that when we hear his adorable bumbling humming for the first time and realise that he's going to give us a map, you can't help but feel relieved by his appearance. This makes Cornifer, in my opinion, the most valuable NPC in the game. Every time you enter a new area and the text pops up on the screen telling you you've entered, say, Fungal Wastes or Deepnest, your first instinct is to hunt for Cornifer. This also leads us to our second official question. How did Cornifer bag a babe like Iselda? Seriously, she's a hot piece of mosquito butt, and Cornifer's this bloated, buggy numpty. He's reaching, and trust me, I know a little something about reaching. If you're curious, check out my video where I make my girlfriend play Dark Souls. But Iselda is stuck up there manning the shop and openly discusses how bummed out she is that the two of them have remained in Hallownest. Maybe she's with Cornifer for his big brain or his gorgeous singing voice, but you know, and I know, that he's doing nothing to contribute to the upkeep of that relationship. What are your secrets, Cornifer? Tell me your way! The map system is one of the most invigorating things about Hollow Knight's design. The environment is littered with breadcrumbs in the form of slips of paper, leading us on a cheeky chase hunting for Cornifer. But purchasing a map from Cornifer isn't the be-all end-all with exploration. Not only does purchasing this first map from Cornifer mean that the family shop has now opened back up in Dirtmouth, it also means that we need to spend the next short chunk of gameplay hunting for Geo, the world's currency, to purchase the Quill and the Compass Charm. Not only does this tutorialise two of the most important systems in the game, it also contributes to opening up the game world in a Metroidvania way by earning new abilities in the form of the Quill, which allows us to track our progression deeper underground. This also means that through battling enemies to take their Geo, we have an incentive to spend a quality amount of time in Forgotten Crossroads, honing our combat skills before the False Knight boss fight to earn enough to afford the egregiously expensive Quill. 120 Geo? I'm beginning to see how your relationship works now, Isilda. You're a gold digger. You're just in it for the money, aren't you? Come to think of it, I'm pretty sure the two of you aren't even from Hallownest, are you? You're just questing for cash, aren't you? Though a really nice touch is that Cornifer's map costs are often fairly priced. In an area such as Deepnest, where he's barely mapped out the terrain, his map is much cheaper than an area he has competently laid out for us, with little hints to interesting areas scribbled down. But, with the Forgotten Crossroads appropriately explored and the game's basic systems effectively tutorialised, our curiosity branches us out towards Greenpath. Before we can properly progress, we need to unlock a new ability, which leads us, appropriately, to how the game gates off our progression.
Bapanada.
Reaching Greenpath, we are faced with our first real obstacle in the game. The Elder Balder, which blocks the way, can't be hurt using our nail, so we need to find some means of breaking through its hard shell. This has already been hinted at through the shield bugs we may have crossed earlier, who are much trickier than any of the combatants we've already faced. They wield weapons we need to get above or behind them for a few quick swipes in, and it leads the player to thinking that surely there's got to be a stronger attack we can use to take them down. Well, luckily for us, the Snail Shaman's here to kidnap us and force us into pursuing a side quest for her to unlock the Vengeful Spirit spell. Now, side quests appear a few times throughout the game, but you may not completely realise that they're side quests at first. Carrying the flower, collecting the grubs, unlocking the stag nest, helping the Snail Shaman, these are all side quests. But Hollow Knight does something really neat to remove the weight from your brain that just lies there, oppressively telling you, this is a side quest, do this. It doesn't track the side quests. The knight doesn't have objective or quest markers, and most importantly, he doesn't have a journal to mark down the various requests the bugs make of you throughout your journey. Yes, there's the Hunter Journal, which tracks your progress, cutting through a certain amount of enemies so that we can get some lore tidbits about them, but this is the only time the game does this, and it's by far the most optional of all the optional content in this game, and by far the least interesting. Moss Creep, weakling that covers itself in leaves to appear larger, hides amongst the undergrowth. I'm so glad I killed 10 of these to learn this. It makes all of these side quests feel like they're there if you want to explore them. Maybe, but you definitely don't have to, and by Team Jerry's own admonition, a lot of the secrets are there just to make the world feel more alive, to give it depth, to make it feel like there's always something going on, and the game absolutely achieves this. But the Snail Shaman's job is to lock us in a mini dungeon and give us the blast ability and teach us how to use it and what it's for. You're always learning new things in the game, constantly gaining aha moments through the abilities. They're not just keys to open a door, they're a brand new means of travelling around, of getting the drop on enemies, and the Vengeful Spirit showcases this in all of its magical glory. It does 3 things. We can now progress past unbreakable blockages like the Elder Balder. The Knight now has a range attack for harder to reach flying enemies, and at this point in the game, this move is stronger than just hitting things with our nail. It's an immediate sense of power to carry us into the next section. Greenpath as an area separates itself from Forgotten Crossroads because of its mossy growth. The space is overgrown, tying to how the bugs in this area, the Mosskin, graciously allowed other bugs to travel through so long as they stuck to the intended path, happily awaiting more bugs to convert to the law of Un, their deity. Of course, with this being Hollow Knight, the player will constantly move away from the intended path, eagerly exploring every crevice and, as a result, being ambushed by the moss creep enemies hidden in the grass. The abilities can be gained in essentially any order the player wishes after a certain point. Typically, once we get to the Vengeful Spirit, it's clear on consecutive playthroughs that Team Cherry want the player to then get the Dash, the Mantis Claw, the Desolate Dive, and so on. But for clever players, they can actually skip sections altogether, leading to speedruns which can last an average of 30 minutes in what is truly a 50+ hour game. For example, you can reach the Crystal Heart without unlocking the Desolate Dive. Heck, using Greenpath as an example, you can pogo off the back of an enemy, so you don't even need to take the long way around to follow Hornet. You can just travel her path, defeat her, and unlock the dash. And every single new unlockable ability can be used in your moment-to-moment decision making, not just in progressing to new areas. The Mothwing Cloak, for example, is an extremely useful double jump that saved my ass a couple of times during combat. The Crystal Heart allows you to race around the map during the late game when backtracking, and it's more important than ever to access secret areas or jump through the many hoops to access the secret Radiant boss fight. Hell, I even started to use it to shorten how long it would take me to get to the nailsmith when I was trying to upgrade my nail, just plugging myself into the wall and blasting off to circumvent the slower jumping and enemy navigation we faced my first time through. The Shade Cloak, which at first just seems to be a transparent means of passing through abyss gates, ends up adding invincibility frames for the player to use during more difficult late game boss fights, where your foes are telegraphing much quicker. And towards the end, during the Godmaster DLC, this becomes almost imperative to get through some of the trickier encounters. Looking at the Dream Nail ability, it immediately seems to be a campaign-centric upgrade, allowing us to break the seals of each of the big three and unlock the game's ending. But this also adds to how we navigate through the world in a more optional way. Again, the level of depth on show by Team Cherry is almost ridiculous. When, out of pure curiosity, I swung the nail at Sly and discovered I could hear his innermost thoughts, wondering about his 3 apprentices out in the world somewhere, I was shocked, and thus began 10 hours of re-exploring the world to slice open the skulls of every bug and peer into their dreams. You can even do this on enemies to hear their infected ramblings, adding against our sense of understanding of the world, of uncovering their secrets, and opening up Hallownest not just through secret paths and gated areas, but through the personal journeys of each of the characters. You're constantly awarded for straying from the path. For example, you can navigate to secret areas and locations where even skulking bosses await us, such as Nosk, who I'll get to, oh baby, I'll get to, and quirky little NPCs who don't even serve a mechanical purpose. They're just sitting, waiting to be found, like the Fluke Hermit. Terrified and hiding from her angry infected mother, she sits, collecting objects from the nearby junk pit, believing them to be treasure. All of this was, again, in service to keeping the world of Hollow Knight feeling alive, and with each new ability we acquire and the sequential secrets these uncover, Hallownest gets bigger and, pardon the pun, deeper. Following Hornet, we get our first story-based boss fight, battling a more swift and agile combatant. Hornet is the first bug we face off against that reminds us a little bit of ourselves. Her white, pointy-headed design, wielding a needle which is, it's like a nail but bigger and stronger than ours, makes us envious of her speed, of her strength, but because she looks more like us than any of the other bugs, we immediately want to level up, get more abilities, and get stronger to be just like her. It's not like with Zero in Mega Man X, where the section is scripted and we need to be saved by someone even stronger than us, which makes us look up to them as a mentor. Hollow Knight is a little bit more brutal than that. Instead, Hornet kicks our ass, again and again, dashing all around the map so we can barely get a smack in. Hollow Knight forces us into climbing the mountain of kicking her ass to earn just one ability, which makes us feel as speedy as she is. It's perfect game design. Don't tell me I'm the only one who saw Hornet as more of a mentor than an obstacle during the knight's journey. I wanted to be Hornet. I wanted the cool spindly silk move. I wanted to yell at enemies to get while cleaving through them. I know people have done deep analytical dives to figure out if she actually says get good or not, and I'm not willing to spend 10 minutes doing that, so just take it as a given that she's telling these buggy little lemmings to sort their bananas out and not touch what they can't afford. Oh, I can't wait to play as Hornet in Silksong, man. Can you tell? Can you tell? Defeating Hornet doesn't really defeat her though. She kindly picks herself back up, vibrating with rage, and bounces out of there in a blind fury. Our sense of accomplishment is momentarily dampened because she's so embarrassed by how she was betrayed by you little that she runs away, refusing to explain anything further like we at first hoped she would do. Not a problem for the player though, because they naturally burrow deeper further down into the Fungal Wastes. The Fungal Wastes, home to the Mushroom Clan and the Mantis Tribe, is the first point where the game appropriately nudges you a couple of rungs up on the ladder of difficulty. The platforming here is more difficult than it was previously, with acid pools everywhere, bouncing spores to leap over chasms and yawning, floating enemies just chilling in the most typical arc that you'd fly through, meaning you need to make the most of your new dash attack to shoot by hazards. Particularly the grotesquely writhing fungi hanging from the ceiling which shoot missiles which could deal double damage are what really test your mobility, needing to move quickly to escape them within the generous time limit provided before they completely nuke you. It's sensible that the difficulty is amped up here because, realistically, if you can make it past Hornet's first battle, you should be able to navigate the Fungal Wastes no problem. The environments, again, feel distinctly unique. You could take any frame from any area of the game, plop it down in front of me, and I'd immediately be able to tell you what area that screen is from. Forbidden Crossroads, Greenpath, Crystal Peak, Fungal Wastes. They're all nicely segmented in colour scheme, enemy variety, and hazards so that each new space feels like an exciting new challenge. But Team Cherry didn't want Hallownest to feel like 15 loosely connected areas with different stuff going on, so often you'll find environments which, in the space of one screen, begin to bleed into tiny natural changes leading to new areas. For example, in the City of Tears, we can see the Fungal Wastes in the background, with tiny mushrooms beginning to sprout from the ceiling like the spawn is beginning to creep through the barricades. Descending even further down, laying in wait, are the Mantis Lords. Defeating these guys completely changes the Mantis village to a pleasant means of safe passage, with all of the residents bowing respectfully to you, impressed by your stature and combat prowess. But the difficulty the player faces in circumventing their security systems at first, with their fast sentries and the tricky platforming to get behind their walls, tells more of a story than any dialogue possibly could. The Mantis Tribe do not want you here. You are not welcome. The entrance to their village is gated off. These enemies are tough and well trained. They don't bleed infection like the bugs up above, showing that they're well in control of their faculties and not mindless drones. They just, quite simply, want to be left alone. Skulls hang from pikes, trophies from their previous battles, and the tight spaces in which you need to navigate the sentries means each battle is fast with them, but slow and methodical for you, needing to plan and gauge your surroundings before charging in. Even your dash ability doesn't help too much here. And this leads me to my greatest and only real criticism of Hollow Knight. I told you, it's an almost perfect game, and that almost is because of the humongous boss run to the Mantis Lords. This boss is incredibly tough. You need to utilize your new ability of dashing to make the most of it, getting swipes in whenever you can, rather than getting cocky and just blindly slashing. After the first phase, if you're not paying attention, you can easily be cleaved in half by the shock of needing to face the remaining two lords whilst their leader nurses her wounds. The two spiked pits either side are there to funnel you into the middle of the arena, needing to constantly dodge around this tiny space, using the verticality rather than the vastness you relied on in a fight like with Hornet or the False Knight. It's so difficult that after being defeated the first time, Quirrell will appear, everybody's favourite adventurer, to tell you you ought to cut your losses and journey into the City of Tears because you're currently too weak to face them, but goddammit, f*** you Quirrell, I've got 2,000 geos sitting down there and those three can kiss my ass! So yes, there's a lot happening in this fight, and the difficulty curve takes such a turn that it might as well be upside down. So the frustrating 5 minutes between Bench and Mantis weaving through the sentries and complex level design is just a tad too long for what stands out as one of the toughest boss fights in the game. But through all of the frustration I felt my first time through, leaping and dashing and dodging and swiping, I didn't get angry. In fact, despite the difficulty of the game, I don't think an average player would have it in them to rage quit. And why is that? Well, I'm glad you asked, silent viewer, because that's our next section.
Bapanada.
The world of Hallownest lulls you into an almost hypnotic state. From the consistently clever reinvention of typical Metroidvania level design, to the charming characters, to the fact that there are legitimately fresh and unique secrets around every corner, there's always a reason to keep exploring. The visual design of each area often uses bright, almost luminescent colour palettes to light our way. In any typical area, you'll have a dark shaded background, almost black, with the knight's stark white head clearly contrasting the back boxes. Neon, almost impossible colours that we wouldn't commonly see in our own natural world, adds to the magical fantasy element of Hallownest. The pink spawn and fungal waste that we can bounce on isn't exactly something that we commonly see roaming the countryside. The Lifeblood plants are a neon blue, radiating a magical essence for us to suck up. To use a more immediate comparison, when you enter the City of Tears, the next step on the knight's journey after the Mantis Lords, the gloomy city buildings are shaded to look like a deep blue, simply sadder and paler because of how far away we are from the knight, whilst also adding to the pathetic fallacy of the space. When Hallownest fell into an infected state and many of the bugs began to lose their minds, the City of Tears sealed its gates to stop anyone from entering or leaving the city, attempting to prevent the masses from entering and spreading the infection. Typically, because this is always the way it goes, the rich and elite resided in the City of Tears, locking themselves in their posh wee homes and leaving the lower class bugs on the outside to tear each other apart. We have been wanting to access Hallownest's capital city for a good while. Many players, myself included, truly expected for a ruler to be waiting for us, to pass on a formal quest. So when we arrive and we see our friend Quirrell just sitting, taking a brief respite on a nearby bench, basking in the gloom, and he tells us that there's honestly nothing to see here, the dread begins to set in for us once again. As far as we're concerned now, there's no ruler here, nowhere for us to go. It's been said 100 times before here, but this wouldn't be a fair critique if I also didn't mention that Quirrell's musings, wondering where the rainfall comes from considering we're deep underground, is answered if we come across the lake up above, slowly breaking through the cavern roof. Our immediate sense of awe and appreciation for Team Cherry's cleverness is then batted away once the existence of this lake reaches its natural conclusion in our minds. One day, the cavern roof will collapse, and the City of Tears will be washed away. It was doomed from the very start. Once Hornet appears, she reluctantly embraces the role of ruler, gives the adventurer his quest, which is particularly noteworthy considering she is the king's daughter. Yes, I know that would make her a princess, but technically I don't see Hornet as any inheritor of Hallownest. She's a warrior and an adventurer, and whilst she has royal blood, it's extremely clear she has no interest in the throne. She tells the player, somewhat ambiguously, that we need to uncover what lies within the Temple of the Black Egg, and to reinforce her point, a big, stonking boss symbol appears on our map. Seems we made the right call earlier when noting that the temple would be the location of our final boss. It's appropriate that Hornet firmly holds the player's hand and points to a giant flashing neon sign that says, "This is where the final boss is," because after this point, the game completely lets you loose onto its world. You can go wherever you want. All Hollow Knight wants the player to do is explore, uncover secrets and mysteries, engage with the atmosphere of the world, and if you've made it to the City of Tears, the game sits you down for a second with Hornet and asks you, genuinely, if it's earned your attention enough to want to keep going. And for most players, the answer of course will be yes. And how does it do that? Well, to answer that question, we need to ask another. What do Ori, Undertale, Hollow Knight, Fall Guys, and my dog all have in common? Well, they're cute as fuck, mate. Hallownest's aesthetics are a lot of things, but whenever I think of what the game's ultimate appeal is, and why the player wants to keep going more than in a game which is also brilliant, like say, Salt and Sanctuary, my answer always comes down to its charm and cuteness. Despite how dark and dank Hollow Knight can get, no matter how grim, no matter how grotesque, we always come back to the adorability of the character designs, the homeliness of the music, and the cheek-pinchingly nommable tone. The backdrop of a ruined society, families torn apart, warring factions, and extinct peoples is delicately contrasted by the mighty Zote's hilarious 57 precepts. Precept 44 is never breathe water. Never breathe water. Seriously, words to live by. Thank you, Zote. This juxtaposition of tone lives in perfect harmony with itself. Like two perfect notes struck on a guitar, they often chime in to stop the player from getting too, well, bummed out by how grim the game world is. The entire concept of the game is bugs with swords. Yes, we are dealing with a new civilization finding religion. We're dealing with a class war, with genocide, with artificial insemination, child murder, personal themes of pride and honour. But we're also looking at bugs with swords. Bugs with swords, people. Even the little knight's design is absolutely adorable. I mean, look at him. But why? Why is all of this so cute to us? The very concept of something being cute links back to Kinshinshima by ethologist Konrad Lorenz in 1949. It all ties to how we've evolved to look at things through a protective nature. Small creatures which initially look weak have evolved in our minds over time with a few similar facets. Let's take the knight's design. For a start, he's small. Smaller than almost any of the other NPCs in the world, with the exception of the terrifying, beautiful, powerful Grey Prince Zote, whose dick is so big that it more than makes up for it. The second is, of course, his, well, outfit. His cloak looks like a pair of wings, wrapped snugly around his body, protecting him from the world around him. His sword is an equally small, skinny nail. And I know this sounds pretty silly and you might not realise it, but because your brain goes, "Huh, that's not a sword, what you gonna do with your nail, little knight?" you immediately see the player character as a cute wee dork. He doesn't have a mouth, which means that he can't talk back, like a baby. Babies cry, sure, and that can be annoying, but they can't talk. They can't tell you to bugger off. A lack of mouth on the knight means he's mute, he's quiet, and as a result, we intrinsically see him as cute. And finally, of course, we have the eyes. If these were even a mite smaller, he wouldn't look nearly as adorable as he does, but yeah, they take up over 2/3 of his face, like a Disney character. All of this is done to make us simp for this little tyke, and similar tactics are used elsewhere. The grubs are designed to be as cutesy as possible to encourage us to want to save them if we hear them in a nearby cavern. It doesn't matter if you're a cat person or a dog person, the fact they sound like their kittens meowing absolutely tugs on that part of your brain that wants to protect small, wide-eyed creatures. Not only this, but I'd be amiss not to mention the disgusting outcome to this side quest. The Grubfather rewards us for every grub we rescue with geo and useful items, making the player complicit in helping him amass his banquet. When we return, all of the cuteness of helping this daddy-o find his babies melts away in complete horror as we realise we've actually been helping him in his quest to feed. Team Cherry, are you telling me in a game all about player choice, you won't let me burst this sucker open like a fat green balloon? Our psyche is at a constant tug of war, playing Hollow Knight. We go from horrific conspiracy of the Soul Sanctum to the downright disturbing Deepnest, which we'll get to, don't worry. But on the flip side, there's so much charm that just oozes out of Hollow Knight's world. A lot of our characters sound jovial in their sound design. Many of them laugh, be it happily or in a joyous way. And because we're descending into the Royal Aqueduct next, we can use everybody's favourite knight as a perfect example. Dung Defender. I mean, listen to this guy. Dung Defender's story is heartbreaking. He was once known as Grimm, one of the kingdom's 5 greatest defenders. But now, in the remnants of the city, he lives alone, the last of his team, surviving in the sewers, having built statues of his old friends out of dung and casting a watchful protective eye over the grave of his beloved Isma. But he still laughs. He still enjoys the vitality of combat, and when the knight enters his arena, he embraces some healthy competition and happily challenges you to a duel. Cloth is the same. She's struggling internally with her own understanding of bravery and cowardice, despite her massive size and imposing club, but still, she laughs. And not in a Dark Souls way where they're laughing because they're batshit insane. Our NPCs laugh in Hollow Knight because they're optimistic. Everything's going to hell. A giant godlike Mothra can poison your dreams and is taking over. But Dung Defender and Cloth don't care. They're just pushing on. Speaking of Dark Souls, the NPCs in Hollow Knight work very similarly. There aren't particular tasks you need to do for each of them. You simply need to find them and listen to what they have to say. The little knight he's a Hufflepuff. He's a very good finder and a very good listener. God, that's not even a joke anymore, is it? You've ruined outdated memes for me, Jacqueline, you monster! I find a parallel can be made between Grimm and the 5 defenders and the knight with his mobile NPCs, Cloth, Quirrell, Tiso, and the gorgeous, passionate Zote. All of these characters are charming, even the diligent and overwhelming Zote, who can do no wrong despite being a massive Wally. Cloth can help with the Traitor Lord boss if you follow her questline, making a boss that could be a real pain in the ass a lot easier. Quirrell too helps with the Umu boss once he reclaims his memory and remembers why he's even here. But in the end, we lose Quirrell and Tiso in a heartbreaking and hilarious way. Quirrell presumably kills himself by the lakeside he wondered about in the City of Tears after fulfilling his narrative purpose, and Tiso, well, Tiso... Cocky bastard. It'd be his downfall eventually. The sound design is to blame for crafting the yin and yang of Hollow Knight as well. In fact, the music is award-winning, and rightfully so. Christopher Larkin, the game's composer, was sent a brief which described the intended music as evoking a sense of melancholy and dark elegance. It would have been all too easy for Larkin to focus on some classic 8-bit music like we saw in the original Kickstarter trailer. It worked absolutely fine there. It wasn't anything special, not much to write home about, but there's a reason why so many YouTubers have Hollow Knight music underpinning a lot of their video essays. It's soothing, it's evocative, and when you need it to be, it's tragic. Let's take the Dirtmouth theme. I'm going to play a brief excerpt, and I want you to bear in mind everything we discussed about the sleepy village above at the start of this video. Two distinct instruments are crystal clear here. The first is the somber violin, taking slow, drawn-out notes, like the night drinking in the atmosphere, surveying how abandoned it is, how isolated it appears from the claustrophobia of the starting area. This is, of course, undercut by the travelling piano underneath, never resting for too long on one note, continuing to move, to journey on. This evokes two things. First, that there was once life here, a small community of friends and neighbours bustling like this piano is now. And second, that if we want to reinvigorate Dirtmouth with that same life, we need to journey on ourselves and delve into the dangers below. Now, let's look at a different piece, the titular theme, Hollow Knight. So I gave a spoiler warning at the beginning, but again, full spoilers for the end of the game in this analysis. There are two pianos talking to each other, similar in origin, in creation, but one has been distorted somehow, warped. Whenever I hear this piece, it's impossible for me not to imagine the little knight and his brother, the Hollow Knight, speaking to each other. The warped piano isn't just distorted, it's echoing, like its chimes are coming from somewhere far away, lost in the egg, tortured and warped by the Radiance. The clear, soothing piano talking over it almost sounds like it's reassuring a lost child. The little knight, seeing his brother for the first time, trying to calm him while he's in so much pain. The sounds of the characters aren't just saddened, however. Team Cherry created an entire language for the bugs of Hallownest. We hear them use similar phrasing, with words like Geo referring to the word currency, and Brava meaning, at least contextually, as alert or danger. The language is fast and almost guttural, not in a terrifying or creepy way, but again, to add to this cuteness aspect that we discussed earlier, the lack of distinct consonant sounds, focusing more on open vowels, reminds you of a child trying to speak. Take a listen. I'm sorry to say that the next area the little knight needs to delve into is devoid of all cuteness. Hold on to your butts. The Soul Sanctum is another example of how the cuteness from earlier eases us into a false sense of security whilst uncovering the harrowing world of Hallownest. The academic bugs here were experimenting on lower creatures, harvesting their soul to try and elevate their minds to a place the Radiance's infection couldn't reach. We fight our first officially magical creatures in here. They fly around and we need to use our platforms to get close enough to take them out. The boss here, the Soul Master, is a dirty, evil bastard of a thing, teleporting all over the arena and keeping just out of reach. When you finally beat him, Hollow Knight strikes out with its first gotcha moment by resurrecting him and smashing you into an underground grave where corpses are piled one on top of another. Their ghosts, angry and resentful, try to gobble you up. And to cast us back to what we said moments before about how the knight's huge eyes make him appear cute, the Soul Masters are askew, orange bulbs, and his gaping maw makes him seem monstrous and almost globular as a villain. By the time we finished with him, we are desperate to escape the City of Tears. Though, once we dive into Deepnest, we begin to realise that maybe we didn't have it so bad in the Soul Sanctum. Deepnest is absolutely horrible. Anybody who's played the game can probably agree that it's the area you want to return to less and less. On my most recent playthrough, I made a point of trying to dig my way into and out of the tunnels with all of the possible collectibles so I wouldn't need to revisit it during backtracking. Despite being such a charming little game, there's something about Deepnest which captures a horror element to the world design, so I've given it its own section because of how devoid of laughter it is when compared to the rest of Hallownest. After defeating the Mantis Lords, the Great Door is opened up to us, and the first thing we see at Deepnest's entrance are more corpses, just like in Soul Sanctum. Swathes of bugs, some still armed with their own nails, are discarded to the side, like a great war was waged here years ago. The first signifier that the player gets to how horrific this space will be is how dark it is. In order to even dig into Deepnest's tunnels, we need to buy the Lumifly lantern to illuminate our way into the burrows. Cornifer is purposefully hidden away, selling a meager, almost useless map because he's too scared to explore any further. There's no music either. All we can hear is the rustling of distant bugs, watching us. Enemies ambush us by bursting out of the ground, and this is the first time the player comes up against a creeper which can climb along walls. Spiders burst out of enemies, sometimes bringing them back to life for round 2, and crawlies race across the screen. Even the tiny spider enemies seem to appear almost out of nothingness, giving a sense of 3-dimensional space to the darkness, like anything could burst out and grab us in these tight tunnels at any point. It's all too easy to get lost, and the player begins to feel the paranoia kick in as they run into more and more useless tunnels. Our whimsical sense of exploration is beginning to betray us. Before, a dead end would often mean a secret was hidden behind a weak wall or a ledge waiting above. Not in Deepnest. But of course, this doesn't mean that Deepnest is missing some of the subtle world building we've come to expect prior to dropping into the depths. Deepnest was occupied by 2 intelligent arachnid groups, the Spider Tribe, which used to be one of the most intelligent species in the land of Hallownest, and the Weavers, an outsider tribe that established their own history and culture in Deepnest. Both groups lived under the rule of their queen, Hera the Beast, which is why the little knight dives into Deepnest in the first place. We need to find her and break her seal on the Temple of the Black Egg. The spiders were often in conflict with the Mantis tribe, which is masterfully presented to us by the many, many, many corpses littering the sealed entrance to their area. If the knight is able to muster his courage and make it further in, the hazards evolve from spike pits to these alive, writhing beds of mindless worms and centipedes, a cacophony of legs and pointy bits. There isn't any joy in Deepnest, no cutesy characters to ease our exploration, just fascinating horrors to uncover. The benches are few and far between, so the journey from each resting point ends up testing the player's endurance rather than their curiosity. It's our orienteering skills which get us through. Our understanding that, well, if we want to make it to safety, we should probably try to head up, right? Dirtmouth is up, the City of Tears is up, ends up betraying us. Because Team Cherry are a mischievous bunch. If you just try to head up, you're likely to walk into a dead end, like the temple linking to the Queen's Garden that you can't progress past because you haven't unlocked the shortcut. The further into Deepnest you explore, the clearer it becomes that in order to get out, you'll have to, for lack of a better term, complete this area. Arriving at the end of Deepnest presents you with this great howling cave with cocoons strung up all around. Tiny houses lie barren and empty, with corpses that look like they've had the life literally sucked out of them by some monstrous creature. Well, almost all of the houses are abandoned. It is a slight shame that your intuition isn't rewarded here though. If you use the dream nail on a couple of the earlier corpses you found, they warn you not to listen to the bugs above, and it's easy for the player to put 2 and 2 together, figuring out that the much too convenient bench surrounded by these cultists seems to be a trap. But even if you do figure all of this out, you have to walk into the cultist trap. I tried everything, attacking them, using my dream nail, severing the webs attaching their home, but in the end I had to swallow my pride and sit on the bench, waiting for them just to gobble me up and leave me waiting for whatever creature they worship to feed. It's been said before, but yes, as a nitpick, I do find it slightly bizarre that Deepnest doesn't have a story-related boss before you find Hera's sleeping body. Lore diggers have wrapped themselves up in webs trying to figure out where the monster is. Has it died off? Is it perhaps Nosk? Well, I don't think it's Nosk, but it damn well ought to be. The fact this terrifying son of a void is a secret boss fight is absolutely astounding to me and shows just how confident Team Cherry were in the standard game world they had already created. Whilst exploring Deepnest, you'll see this little bugger who looks strangely like us. Friend?
Hello, friend! Hello, friend! 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 Friend!
Eventually, following him, we find this horrific lair, with bugs and similar creatures to ourselves hanging, spun and woven from the ceiling. Whilst Nosk's boss fight is nothing to particularly write home about, his introduction is by far one of the most memorable and spooky moments of the game. Seeing a reflection of yourself twist and warp completely changes how we see the dangers of Hallownest, and his speed scuttling about on 6 legs that can be difficult to dodge makes him a dangerous adversary. When the game originally launched, it was easy to cheese Nosk while chilling by a wedge in his arena, but Team Cherry swiftly patched this by adding his new moveset of vanishing into the ceiling and dropping globs of infection to burn us. I would have had absolutely no problem with Nosk being the monster which the cultists sacrifice us to, and I fall firmly into the camp that whichever beast lurks or used to lurk in Deepnest must have a more prominent role to play in Hornet's adventure. Finding Hera and breaking her seal weakens the Hollow Knight's prison, and as a result, our second piece of horror appears, the evolution of the Forgotten Crossroads into the Infected Crossroads. The enemies in this opening section, which once seemed to be such a cakewalk by comparison in the growth of our hero, are now a stark reminder that the Little Knight is not the badass we were beginning to see him as after conquering Deepnest. The map completely evolves, and our previously convenient shortcut to the Stag Station is suddenly closed off by the infection seeping out of the world. Some of the previous enemies, such as the Vengeflies, which up until now were barely a nuisance, become bloated by infection, growing 3 sizes and becoming explosive, and anybody who's tried to attempt the Flower side quest knows that getting through this area without taking any damage is suddenly one of the toughest challenges in the game. Worst of all, one of our previous allies, Mira, singing her cute wee song about abolishing the monarchy, becomes an enemy, losing her mind through the Radiance's temptation, and she now guards the entrance to Crystal Peak, ready to lob her infinite amount of pickaxes at the player. Speaking of Crystal Peak, both Crystal Peak and Fog Canyon, the next 2 stops in our journey, are where the game officially begins to challenge the player's understanding of Hollow Knight's movement and controls. Crystal Peak is one large interconnected mine that the bugs industrialized to harvest the crystals embedded there for their great power, whatever that means, because we still don't know. God damn it, Team Cherry! The bright pink crystals which peek out of the walls are lethal to the knight. Even grazing these pointy little zotes are enough to knock the player right back. We need to rely on our dash to leap from conveyor belt to conveyor belt in some cases, managing enemies which can quickly become invulnerable to our attacks. It's a nice visual overhaul from the darkness of Deepnest, but Crystal Peak is hardly a friendly place. Mistiming a jump can drop the knight faster than EA dropped Anthem, and the plethora of enemies here are a neat means of tutorializing the tall, wide open space that is Kingdom's Edge next. At the start of the game, the knight can walk and jump. That's it. As I mentioned earlier, this has clearly been deliberately catered so that the player is forced to drink in the world's atmosphere, but with each new power-up, the little guy becomes more and more sprightly. The game has some of the most responsive platforming I've seen since Rayman Legends, and if you've seen my other videos, you know how much I adore the speed of that game. At certain points, like with Crystal Peak's more upbeat obstacle courses, Hollow Knight ends up being a very speedy game with its platforming. Mid-air hazards become more common from this point on, and you need to make the most of whichever upgrades you've acquired so far. The dash, the double jump, and the wall jump suddenly become essential to your moveset, and if utilised appropriately, you can cross from one edge of the map to the other in about 10 minutes, despite its labyrinthian design. The lack of fall damage also increases the player's confidence in experimentation. So long as you avoid the thorns, or the spikes, or the writhing worms, you'll be a-okay. Often with platforming games like, say, Cuphead, there's a momentary split-second delay in your jump, meaning you need to anticipate an enemy's attacks or an upcoming platform in advance of it becoming an immediate threat. With Hollow Knight, it's all about the reflexes, which is natural considering the speedy telegraphing of some of the bosses. Holding down the jump button gives the knight a higher jump, just as holding down the dash button gives you a longer dash, which adds to this sense of responsiveness. The purpose here is ultimately to master how long you can sustain yourself in the air. Using the pogo stick maneuver like we see in games like Shovel Knight, the player can time little bounces over pits or traps just to save themselves at the last minute if something goes horribly wrong. I mean, look at how many traversal choices you're forced to make in the span of just 10 seconds here. We need to use the Mantis Claw to get high up, but the obstacles in our way mean we need to constantly be aware of these difficult hazards. Not only do they activate on a cooldown, so we need to time being near them, their backs are covered in crystals, so even touching them can hurt us and they're invulnerable to our nail. The next room over has these crystal bugs activating at different times, so our reflexes need to keep us out of danger, and we need to use the dash and the Mantis Claw to maneuver around them. We're being forced to use our new abilities in moment-to-moment gameplay, rather than our new skills being saved to unlock a door. Some of the charms you get even improve upon this to an even greater effect. Sprint Master gives the knight a wee kick up the arse so his stubby little legs can run like the wind. Dash Master means you can dash twice without needing to reset on a surface, meaning if you equip these movement-specific optional upgrades, the knight can almost look like he's flying around in a skilled pair of hands. Which is exactly what I did to get through Fog Canyon. The second of our sleeping beings is in here, Monomon the Teacher, hidden away in her laboratory behind pools of acid and the second most annoying enemies in the entire game. If Crystal Peak requires us to use our surroundings in the form of the crystals and the conveyor belts, Fog Canyon needs us to avoid pretty much everything, really. The tiny jellyfish are harmless enough, they're just floating about like enemies we saw previously in the fungal wastes. But the big daddy jellyfish, oh, the infection inside of these bapanadas homes in on the player if you swipe at them, conking off 2 marks of damage, and because I suck at navigating Fog Canyon, I often just need to equip the Grubsong charm and take the hit, heal, travel further in, and repeat. Our core understanding of the traversal mechanics are absolutely necessary to tackling Umu, the Fog Canyon boss. The main feature of the area is the teacher's archives, where Monomon stored all of her research and the kingdom's knowledge. In an attempt to stop the infection, Monomon became a dreamer, sleeping for all eternity in her archives. And once we eventually find her archives buried away among the moss, we recruit Quirrell to help with the boss inside. Umu is definitely the most gimmicky of all the bosses. Rather than a straight-up fight to the death, Team Cherry have shaken up the formula a tad by dropping the player in an open space with numerous platforms that they need to hop from, dodging attacks until Quirrell can open up a window for us to capitalise on. Also, why can't we get that moveset? Screw Hornet, I don't want to be like her anymore. I want to be like Quirrell. Look at those lightning-quick reflexes. He basically disappears, appears, punctures the electric shell, and vanishes again. It's not our combat skills which are tugged at here, it's our platforming abilities. The dash, Mantis Claw, double jump, and control over our basic jump are our most useful tools in this trial. If finding Hera the Beast qualifies our orienteering skills, finding Monomon is all about movement. Which of course leaves our final dreamer to act as a tribulation of combat. Slaying Monomon and leaving sad dad Quirrell to journey on with his blessing, our final dreamer to tackle is Lurien the Watcher, who's been under our nose the whole time, watching over the residents of the City of Tears. Maybe it's just my proletariat bias, viva la revolution comrades, but Lurien is definitely the least interesting of the 3 dreamers. Hera was a clever, ferocious queen who bartered with the Pale King to receive a daughter. Monomon's intelligence knew no equal. Lurien creepily stalked the rich and had a butler, I guess, and actively talked about how much he wanted to suck the Pale King's bappa noodle. To reach him, the player has to scale his tower, where his servants and concubines lived under his wealth and protection. And considering the Watcher Knights are a boss entirely focused on our combat mastery and endurance, now's a good time to explore how Hollow Knight makes its combat feel visceral, despite being a little bug wielding a nail. A lot of this comes down to the sound design. The way the music just crunches out before fading back in if the knight takes a smack to the noggin forms a kinetic tie in how dangerous the world feels. The player can swing their sword in one of the 4 cardinal directions at any given time by angling the analog sticks appropriately. Up, left, right, and if they jump in the air, they can use that pogo ability we figured out during movement to smack down on an enemy's shell. The creepy crawlies we need to muscle through during our 50-hour adventure are often unique to each area, only repeating themselves when the game world feels like it would make sense. For example, some of the guards in the City of Tears will find themselves in the Royal Waterways, but you're literally slopping around in the kingdom's sewers, so it makes sense that they may have dropped in to scout out the nearby area. Using the Hunter's Journal as our reference point, there are 164 possible enemies in the game, and while some of these are functionally the same creature, hello crawlids and tick-ticks, that's still a ridiculously impressive number. Team Cherry took the time to ensure each area of the game continues to feel unique in how every single enemy needs its own independent strategy, whether that's leaping in the air for a quick swipe, or pogoing on their back, or even just using the spells to break through a hard shell. Speaking of spells, on top of the nail, the knight can collect spell attacks which use our focus bar. We earn focus through hacking at enemies, and if we earn enough, we can use powerful spell attacks which cleave through basic warriors and can do some pretty serious damage to bosses as well. For the Watcher Knights, to bring it back to our current boss, my strategy was often on keeping a Desolate Dive spell in my back pocket in case a couple of these knobbly sods cornered me, as they were privy to do. Unlocking upgrades for these spells requires the player to continue exploring, and both the Vengeful Spirit and the Desolate Dive are traversal upgrades as well, unlocking new areas to explore. With this boss, it's all about endurance. When we enter, we get a nice, long allotment of time to try to take down the first knight which appears, but careful observers will note that the room is riddled with corpses just like it, and our current foe was resurrected by the infection. We get plenty of time to try and get used to his moveset, training the player to handle one of these lonesome warriors with ease just to chuck in another, and then another, and then another, so it's not long before we need to revisit our skills from the Mantis Lord's fight with battling two strong foes at once in a cramped space. The reason why this is a test of endurance is because the arena is so claustrophobic, and the Watcher Knights are so speedy and large that it's extremely difficult to hunker down for those pregnant 2 seconds it takes to charge our focus and heal. This is all because the healing system is about risk and reward. That focus we're earning from smacking an enemy about isn't just for casting spells, it's also for recapping our health. The issue is in how long it takes, meaning we often need to form a momentary retreat to gasp for air before jumping back into the battle. As a result, the tension of battle is magnified, falling down to one remaining mask, and no focus always means that the player's next move has to be to get in there for a couple of jabs to refill our focus bar. It's constantly something to be aware of, and every second decision in our moment-to-moment decision-making will be the phrase, "Is now a good time to heal?" The game even strips the knight's abilities in creative ways at the very beginning. Not only do we need to upgrade the basics like a waypoint marker or a quill to track our progress in exploring, but bashing an enemy with our nail even moves the knight back about half an inch, meaning if we're tackling a bug over a precarious pit, we could fall into some traps or spikes if we're not careful. But if this begins to frustrate the player, then the game kindly provides an optional upgrade to that in the form of the charms. And the charm system is one of the most creative things about how Hollow Knight focuses on gear. On top of our typical abilities which open up the world, these also strengthen our knight, making the most of that Metroidvania design we discussed earlier. We can mix and match these as we see fit. If you use a Soul Eater, Shaman Stone and Spell Twister, you can create a highly effective magic build for the knight. Alternatively, you could equip Quick Slash, Fury of the Fallen and Long Nail to improve your nail-wielding abilities, dueling like a warrior of old. Some of these charms can even be combined to unlock secret effects. Combining, say, the Spore Shroom and Defender's Crest makes you a stink powerhouse, weakening enemies whilst you focus up. The game forces us to become a better player by keeping the knight's level, quote-unquote, the same as it is at the beginning of the game. If you want to strengthen the knight, you need to use the currency system, Geo, to buy charms and masks, this game's version of hearts, strengthening your nail as well by visiting the nailsmith. The game's systems are symbiotic. They feed off of each other more so than any Metroidvania mechanics I've seen before. Exploration is how you strengthen your character, not through just grinding experience points. You need to find the mask pieces, find the pale ore, find the charms, find the charm notches, so you can wield enough of them to be truly effective. Entirely through our exploration. And of course, the stronger we get, and the more traversal abilities we gather, the more we can explore, turning it into a satisfying game loop as we journey on. Now, I've heard a couple of complaints that the final upgrade for your nail makes the knight overpowered, and I can't disagree enough. It doesn't matter how strong the knight is if you can't dodge enemies' attacks, and every battle is all about speed and reaction times rather than blundering and trying to tank hits. And even if this was the case, it's not as if the final upgrade is just gifted to you. In order to gather all of the items for this upgrade, you need to defeat Nosk, collect 31 grubs, and come out on top in one of the trials in the Colosseum of Fools, just to name a few. If you're able to unlock the Pure Nail, nobody can argue that you haven't damn well earned it through establishing your combat prowess. Speaking of the Colosseum of Fools, it's located at the very top of a new area called Kingdom's Edge. Now that we've slain the Watcher Knights, let's cast our mind back to when we spoke with Hornet in the City of Tears. She told us to find her in the Grave of Ash, and it looks to me like Kingdom's Edge has some strange white stuff falling from the sky. Like ash. This is all because Kingdom's Edge is the area where Hallownest's ruler, the Pale King, arrived as a large worm with a Y before the kingdom was founded. He shed his shell in the east part of Kingdom's Edge and transformed into his smaller form. His decaying original corpse became responsible for the apparent ash, which we see following. It's actually the king's malt. Yeah, dead skin. If the Big Daddy Jellyfish in the Fog Canyon is the second most annoying enemy in the game, the Flying Aspens for sure take the top spot. Look at these cocky little bugs just floating there, being nothing less of an ultra nuisance whilst trying to tackle the elephant flies. Climbing our way up, and out, there's a neat rest stop in the form of a bench. With the crisp white colour palette behind us and the tent housing what almost look like frozen corpses, it's easy to feel like we're almost in the Arctic Circle of Hallownest. Of course, the pale colour palette is purely because of the worm, but with the vast expanse of whites and greys stretching off into the distance, it's clearly been placed here to remind the player just how small they are in this vast maze of a map before we find Hornet. Kingdom's Edge also houses one of the Nail Masters. The game sprinkles 3 of these angry boys in the corners of the map, and if you find them, they can add yet another dimension to Hollow Knight's surprisingly deep combat in the form of nail arts, special moves which can make the knight feel like a mastered swordsman after collecting them all. Sly, the ultimate nail master, even addresses you as an equal once you return to him with all of the nail arts, using our rapture of the world to strengthen how we see our player character. And of course, I'd be amiss if I didn't mention how you can ship the nailsmith and nailmaster Shio if you're able to find the artist in Greenpath and set the two up. Again, to link back to this toing and froing of tone, we go from sad melancholy of the nailsmith begging you to end his life after serving his in-game purpose, to the possibility of spreading a little joy in the world and thinking outside the box. Team Cherry rewards you for engaging in the game's world by finding a new optimistic route for the nailsmith to take, living out the rest of his days in peace with Shio, painting him like one of his French bugs. Clambering to the top of Kingdom's Edge, we are met with the game's ultimate combat trial in the form of the Colosseum of Fools. Wrangling through 3 lengthy arena fights rewards us with heaps of geo to be used in leveling up our nail or buying further charms to design new builds. Or at least, this is our mechanical reward for completing it. We also get the conclusion to Tiso's questline, and even get the chance to kick the vigorous Sote's ass. Now, the enchanting Zote might look like he's just flailing about with absolutely no skill here, but he's actually testing us to gauge what our moveset might be for when the rematch happens. And if you complete the Colosseum of Fools, you get that rematch in the form of a Dream Boss, proving once again that Hollow Knight's layers just keep going and going and going. There's such a wealth of content here that playing the game just feels like you're cheating Team Cherry out of their true worth. Although with the challenge that Colosseum of Fools generally provides, you should prepare to die a lot, especially in the final trial, which means I can shoehorn talking about the death mechanics into this section, eh? I've seen a few hot takes online where some people have claimed the death and checkpoint system prevented them from being able to finish the game. Not that the game was too hard, but what follows was too tedious. I respectfully disagree. When the player is struck down by enemies, they leave behind a shade of their former selves, carrying all of our geo and half of our focus bar. Any typical player needs to reclaim their globular ghost before moving on to the next boss or continuing through the next area. Using benches as our checkpoints means that we will learn and relearn these areas over and over again, meaning that by the time it comes into the final third and we are encouraged to backtrack through previous areas, we know the fastest paths and have unlocked the quickest shortcuts. Reviving on a bench also updates our map. We can only use our quill when resting, so dying doesn't feel too harsh. We're rewarded for getting as far as we did by having our map filled in further, and are presented with an opportunity to relearn our path, popping our heads into secret crevices using that map that we may have missed the first time through. I don't see anything tedious about that if you've allowed yourself to fall in the game's dreamy state. A neat touch is that the Shade also fights back using the abilities and spells the Knight has collected so far. Once we collect, say, the Desolate Dive, the Shade will use the Desolate Dive. If we've increased our health, it takes more attacks to absorb it. Of course, if you don't want to do any of these things, you could always nab a quick ride back to Dirtmouth to visit Gigi, where the cost of a single rancid egg will get her to summon your Shade, including all of your Geo. It's a firm but fair system. Completing the Colosseum of Fools and finding the worm shell, we're beginning to feel a bit more confident about our understanding of the world. And just in case you haven't been able to piece the core story together, we thankfully found Hornet once again, who's going to help us draw the strings together. Hornet's second fight is much tougher than her first. It's not necessarily that her skills are even that much harsher, it's that the tiny box the two of you are locked in means you are never out of her reach. The risk-reward system of healing is almost impossible here, and whenever I battle her the second time around, you should only ever really heal if she's momentarily downed. Whereas in the first fight, the longer arena meant her dash attacks could sometimes miss you, she could overshot or even land a little bit early. This time, it means you need to duck, dodge, dip, dive, and dodge her attacks if you want to stand a chance. Defeating our mentor for a second time, though, firmly plants us as prepared and ready for the Hollow Knight battle. It's my firm belief that if you can defeat Hornet's second phase, you're absolutely strong enough to defeat the final boss. But before we meet our brethren, there are a few optional areas we are going to explore first. Hornet has encouraged us to plunge ourselves even deeper into Hallownest, yes, even deeper than Deepnest, so we are going to follow her lead. Beneath the Royal Waterways' sinkly pink and blue pale colour palette lies the ancient Basin with its blacks, beiges and browns. As if the further down we go, the world design is trying to connote this rotting sense of death. Enemies appear to be more and more mindless and monstrous, almost blending into the background and sneaking up on us. The Pale King built his palace in ancient Basin, and it was from there that the kingdom of Hallownest spread. He ruled Hallownest from the White Palace, rarely leaving it, but the palace disappeared together with the Pale King after the infection reappeared. The very fact this space exists tells us that something, some civilization, existed here long before Hallownest grew. But who or what this civilization was is still lost to the more adept lore hunters. If you know something, please let me know in the comments below. I've struggled to find much information in my research aside from some tiny details. It's insane to me, and it's worth commenting on as we drop through the ancient Basin, that Team Cherry does an absurd amount of storytelling in its very contained level design. One of the criticisms I've heard is that there are no inclines or declines in the levels, so when all is said and done, some of the areas can feel quite tame and samey. This is both a fair assessment and a dire mistake. Yes, all of the traversable surfaces in the game are flat, but this is to the game's benefit, not its detriment, for two reasons, so sit down you dirty nosk and let me explain. The flat level design assists the combat. The Knight's sword swipe doesn't have a particularly wide arc without a charm to improve it, so if an enemy had the high ground on a slope, we'd be at a constant disadvantage, pushing difficulty away from fair and into, well, unfair. This is also an immediate way for the game to telegraph surfaces that the Knight can crawl, hop and run across. At a few rare points in the game, like in Crystal Peak, some walls sit at a 45-degree angle, meaning the Knight can't climb up them using the Mantis Claw. Traversal moves generally in straight lines as well. You dash straight to the sides, so using flat surfaces means the game naturally teaches you about how to maneuver around tricky obstacles. If you're looking for a specific example of why this is so important, take the Abyss. Unlocking the King's door with the ring horn it guides us to means we finally have access to the Pale King's dirty little secret. An astronomical drop is laid out below us, and while tumbling down, it's easy enough to reach the bottom if your reflexes are sharp, pogoing on top of spokes to avoid damage. But when the time comes to climb back up, the sides are once again knobby and slanted, meaning the player clearly understands they can't just mantis claw their way back up. The entire idea of climbing to the top of the abyss is supposed to be a difficult task. The story depends on it, in fact, as it seems only 3 creatures have ever made it out: the Hollow Knight, the Little Knight, who we play as, and the Broken Vessel, the ancient Basin boss. Well, and maybe the mysterious Zote as well, but that's a lore theory I'll leave to Mossbag, but I digress. If Hallownest's level design was packed with curves and inclines, the fact the player couldn't just use the Mantis Claw to nudge their way up to the side of this dangerous climb would seem artificial and false, and so much of the game has gone to almost laborious lengths to make Hallownest's clever design seem just a part of the world. We'll return to the level design in a second, but for now, it's here in the Abyss that we learn that the Little Knight was ultimately just a test tube baby. He and his brethren were a horrific experiment created by the Pale King in an effort to find one vessel which could contain the Radiance's infection and protect it from spreading to Hallownest. If you follow the path to the good ending, quote-unquote, where you battle the Radiance, this space marks one of the most poignant hand-holding story moments of the entire game, and though it doesn't contain a single word, I'm going to play it here. It's like watching a sad puppy be abandoned by its master, watching the Pale King take the Hollow Knight away to be locked in his tomb whilst the Little Knight just looks on. It legitimately breaks my heart, and it's all done without a single piece of dialogue. You don't even need to be fully up to date on the lore for this to work either. It's just some simple, clean, visual storytelling. That look back that the knight gives to the vessel is almost a silent means of saying sorry. His larger horns present him as a bigger brother, abandoning his companion, and to top it all off, Christopher Larkin cracks our hearts by using the stereotype for saddest instruments in the whole world, a violin. The Shade Cloak is the last of our traversal abilities we require to open up the world, so this means we get to cross over to our next optional area worth looking at, the Queen's Garden. The simplicity of the storytelling is continued in the level design here as well. It's falling apart, long abandoned, highlighted by the collapsing platforms we need to leap through to reach the end. Vines have overgrown this space, more reminiscent of Greenpath and the Fungal wastes than of a lavish garden. It once belonged to the moss bugs we met at the start of the game, but at some point, this area was annexed by the White Lady, Hallownest's queen, who turned it into her well-guarded retreat. After the White Lady bound herself in her chamber in the gardens and the infection returned, the gardens grew wild and overgrown. The level design here simply reveals to us the long-lasting damage the Radiance's infection had on the evolution of Hallownest. It didn't just cause the bugs to lose their minds, it also caused the world to revert back into its more naturalistic state through the lack of care and attention that would come from bugs that were sentient. Inevitably, some mantis traitors settled here after being exiled from their village in the Fungal wastes, and have since taken it over completely, forming our enemy types. Sounds like a perfect place for Cloth to earn her badge of bravery, which is lucky because she meets us at the entrance if we've been following her questline, and she'll ultimately help us in the Traitor Lord boss fight, which awaits at the end. The Queen's Garden is a natural next step in testing our platforming abilities. The Fog Canyon and Crystal Peak pale in comparison to the tricky traversal and hovering enemies waiting for the night here. This is yet another example of how Team Cherry used the size of spaces as a concrete storytelling mechanic. The Queen's Garden was once a place for royalty to visit, so it's vast and open in its main path. But once you tread off the beaten track, you're funneled into narrow spaces because the overgrowth has conquered the lavish architecture. The signs which litter the game world, diegetic means of heralding safety in the forms of benches or stag stations, are more unkempt here, squinted and falling, and I don't know if this is by accident, but Deepnest and the Queen's Garden are the two places I have never seen the mender bug. See, as you journey underground, it's inherently satisfying to just swing your nail and crunch up your surroundings as you jog through. It speaks to me doing this, speaks to my very soul, speaks to the player inside that reads a message in Dark Souls that says, "Time for rolling," and shouts, "Yes!" before frantically bashing into anything which can break. But Team Cherry took the time to design, animate, and program a random bug which only the savviest of players will see to fix the signs in the world so the poor wee player doesn't bugger themselves out of directions when heading back through an area. However, yes, here in Queen's Garden, the signs are already overgrown, and even in one case, pointing in the wrong direction, sending the player on a wild goose chase to find a stag station, which is only accessible through a shortcut. Speaking of the stag stations, with a game as large and dense as Hollow Knight, it's only natural that a fast travel system would link up the 15 areas. Even Deepnest gets one, and that place is full of spider hillbillies. And because Team Cherry are so determined to have everything in its world contain its own tiny piece of the story puzzle, the Stagways not only reveal tidbits of lore to us through the last stag's wise musings, but we also learn more and more about his species and their extinction with every stag station we unlock. The placement of these is almost always just close enough that you can dash back if you need to travel back to the surface to buy goods and services, forming a natural bond between the player and the last stag. He doesn't just become our means of transport, but our friend as well. And ringing his bell at the end of wastelands like Deepnest or complicated obstacle courses like Queen's Garden always feels like just, taking a load off. Though in the late game, for complicated boss runs like the Hive Knight, it's likely the player will use their fully leveled up Dream Nail as an altogether different fast travel system. Upgrading the Dream Nail unlocks the ability to set a marker in a level for us to zap to at any point through simply holding down a couple of buttons, and if we unlock this early enough, it makes backtracking and the tougher bosses much easier to swallow. As a rule, I just planted one in Dirtmouth so at any point I was near shops, GG and a stag station to carry me to wherever I needed to go. And also, so the last stag didn't feel left out, didn't want the old boy to think I'd abandoned him in favour of my Dream Nail. Finding all of the stag stations and completing his little side quest gives us a final destination for the two of you to travel to, and because of how vague and subtle the game is in its storytelling, you may not realise this is even a side quest until you've found your 5th station. Learning that the last stag is truly the last of his kind, with the name change and everything, is enough to make an avid player cry, until you find that egg. That single egg giving another joyous little burst of hope for Hallownest, that stag life might very well bloom long after we leave here. I get the sense that the Howling Cliffs are only here to tease the player for wanting to explore past the map, but you can mock me all you like, Team Cherry, because knowing that there's possible life beyond Hallownest is just whetting my appetite even more for Silksong. After all, the Grimm Troupe come from the outside world. The little knight must have travelled somewhere and learned to wield a blade. Heck, the stags live on the fringes of Hallownest, so perhaps their origin is from beyond the walls. And of course, the greatest mystery of all, and I'm sorry to come back to this, but where is Iselda from, and why is she with Cornifer? What is he offering you that I can't, Iselda? Love me! This is a solid optional area for us to finish on for this section, because the fact you can access the Howling Cliffs either through unlocking all of the stag stations or by simply returning to the starting area and just clambering back up the way you came shows how the game is ultimately smarter than you are. Team Cherry know what you're going to try and do, and they reward your intuition by creating this vapid, empty space with just a few mindless critters and a heckload of geo for us to swallow up. And it's also here that they planted the starting pistol for some of the game's DLC as well. So if you'll forgive me, and so that I can feel that this video is as complete as it could be, let's have a brief look at the content updates before moving on to the ending.
Bapanada.
It's worth mentioning that all of the DLC I'll be discussing was released for free. New bosses, new music, new game mechanics in the form of the charms, and completely new areas were all designed and uploaded as free updates to the game, so whilst I'm slightly critical of a couple of these points, it's important for me to add that it doesn't, at least personally, detract from how finely crafted the base game is. Because if Hollow Knight as a base game is a symphony of gorgeous little notes blending with a specific and rigorous rhythm that the player needs to follow, the content updates are simply new instruments that Team Cherry added to that game's orchestra. And if I'm going to stick with such a pompous analogy, which I will because I'm a stubborn bastard, the Grimm Troupe is a cymbal crash that's just out of step with that rigorous beat. Once the Nightmare King arrives in Dirtmouth, hailing from a faraway land, summoned by the Little Knight to perform together, he makes one hell of an impact through the new soundtrack he brings, his flashy presentation and mysterious otherworldliness, and his new, challenging boss fight. But as far as active gameplay is concerned, the Grimm Troupe trips by sending the player out on a strange fetch quest for magical fire. These are immediately marked on the map, forcing the player to revisit areas which, by the time we've discovered the Grimm Troupe, we almost certainly have already explored at length. Gating away Grimm's boss fight in this way seems to feel like padding, and strangely it's the first and only time that Hollow Knight made me feel like it was wasting my time. Finding each of these flames leads to a frustrating piece of combat as well. Each of these little buggers seems to have an opposing magnet to us. Just look at this. Come here, you little bastard. God damn it. We need to set out, find 3 flames, and return to Grimm 3 times. Twice to unlock the first boss fight, and a final time to unlock Grimm's true form, which is far too many. Once would have been more than enough. And as far as his boss fight is concerned, this is clearly where a lot of the team's work was invested. Grimm's a really interesting boss, utilising magic, contributing to the fantastical nature of the world. He's a tricky fight, even the first time through, and we're depowered for it because we lose 2 charm notches to the Grimm Child, needing to pass him over before the battle can begin. It's an interesting way to up the difficulty, aside from his fast-paced moveset, which gets even speedier with each of his 3 phases. The Grimm Troupe as content is also a stepping stone for the Godmaster DLC. If you're willing to invest an insane amount of geo, you can increase your overall strength and health in advance of the boss rush mode, and the Nightmare King battle is infamous as being one of the toughest fights in the game. I confess to this day I'm still unable to beat him, clocking in easily, 40-50 attempts. The Hive, a completely secret area which was accessible in the main game, now has a boss as well. This space is generally quite wide open, with numerous open arenas and flying enemies which can bombard you with attacks, testing your ability to handle small platforms, and a large amount of bugs with quite large health pools. This area also has one of the neater environmental details which generally appear on an average of every 10 seconds. You find the bench frozen in honey and need to crack open its casing to unlock a resting area, showing that whilst this area is certainly one of the weaker levels in the game, it's not without the love and attention to detail which Team Cherry demonstrate elsewhere. It's a shame then that realistically by the time you access this content, the Little Knight is likely to be fully leveled up with the strongest charms and the pure nail in hand, so the boss of this area ends up being a bit of a pushover. Sorry, pal. Of course, boss-wise, this is contrasted with the kick in the teeth, which is Zote's new boss fight. They saw how meme-worthy the invincible, fearless, sensual, mysterious, enchanting, vigorous, diligent, overwhelming, gorgeous, passionate, terrifying, beautiful, powerful Grey Prince Zote had become in the fanbase, and actually took the time to give us a dream battle to settle the score once and for all. Who shall win the hand of Bretta? Not that Bretta is a trophy to be won, she's a strong, independent bug and can make her own decisions. But you need to fight Zote no less than 10 times to undo the Stockholm Syndrome the poor girl has been suckered into. Just like Nightmare King Grimm, I haven't been able to defeat Zote myself, so thank you to Razhork for letting me steal his footage. The channel is linked below. Zote is fast as he is mighty, spawning tiny exploding versions of himself, sending cataclysmic shockwaves with almost each attack by the 10th stage, and best yet, each new battle with him as a new mechanic to his moveset. This is both ridiculous and a well-designed boss fight, forcing the player to always be thinking 3 steps ahead and have memorized the telegraphs for each of his many moves. Speaking of new challenging opportunities for the player to test themselves, which I appreciate but fail miserably at, footage provided by Fireborn, channels below, the White Palace also gets some new content added to it. The path of pain is a hellhole, and anybody who can make it through without taking a hit is lying to you. They're lying to you, and I wouldn't let them sell me an apple. Though I enjoy that you can think ahead with this lethal obstacle course, acting as the ultimate test of your movement skills, adding the Grub Song, the Hiveblood, and the Dash Master to create a build which is specially enhanced to get you through. I have nothing else to say about it though. I don't want to think about it ever again. I'm glad it exists, but God, I've spent hours trying to navigate that torture chamber. Not much in the way of analysis there, I know, but just yuck, man. Which brings us to the final content pack Team Cherry released, Godmaster, which retroactively added a 3rd potential ending to the story, a new area in the form of Godhome, a blistering boss rush mode, 3 new bosses, and updated boss fights in the form of Nosk, now adding Wings, the Mantis Lords, forcing you to fight all 3 at once, the Hollow Knight battling him at full force in his prime, and of course, the absolute Radiance, which is a bonkers fight for bonkers people. Unlike with the Grimm Troupe, I don't mind the lengthy journey the player needs to go on to access this DLC. Finding Pale Lurker in the Colosseum of Fools branches out the map just a little bit further, and as a mini-boss, needing to chase her down is enough of a new gimmick for it to separate itself from other enemies. As for the lore, Godhome brings a lot of smaller details for each of our bosses in the form of these gorgeous statues, confirming player suspicions in some cases and adding bizarre new characteristics in others. These statues can be used to test our skills against particularly tricky foes before dropping into the boss rush mode, where only the greatest combatants will reign supreme. I would have loved for there to be a way for players who have completed Godmaster's DLC to be able to stick their name on a leaderboard somewhere so that other players could gasp in awe at their success. As for me, if you're interested, I haven't beaten Godmaster either, and despite my adoration for this game and my ability to drip hours and hours into Hallownest, it's extremely unlikely that I will beat it. Getting my ass handed to me by Nailmaster Sly for the 50th time was more than enough for me to put down the controller, throw my hands into the air and go, yep, nope, I think that's enough bugs for me right now. I appreciate that Godhome used a similar backdrop to the dreamscapes the players previously experienced in the main game. It helped to put some of our previous experiences in the context of the world. We have, in fact, been travelling to Godhome every time, which is where the minds or spirits or whatever of Monomon, Hera, and Lurien have resided since they agreed to give their power to seal away the Radiance. This land, be it metaphysical or in Hallownest's little reality, is full of a peoples called God Seekers, who are essentially a cult who once worshipped a god. After the Radiance was sealed away, they started to look for a new being to worship, the God of Gods. Thus they held their championship to test the mettle of many powerful beings. I think. My brain hurts trying to think about it. I happily understand that a lot of Hollow Knight's lore, but the second Godmaster appeared, there are a lot of new threads that started to be spun. I'm almost certainly wrong in my understanding. If anyone knows anything else, please feel free to drop me a line and let me know. I'm particularly confused, if you're curious, as to why all of our previous bosses are even here. What does Hornet think of being summoned to Godhome? What about Sly? I feel like he'd have a couple of things to say. Or is this like the spiritual versions of foes that we've previously battled? Because I'm pretty sure that we murdered the Gru's mother when she exploded. Like, what are you doing here? Okay, so, having hacked and slashed and uncovered all of Hallownest's secrets, it's time for a family reunion. Entering the Temple of the Black Egg, we are faced with one of the most evocative images of the entire game. The Hollow Knight awaits us, chained up, curiously watching us as we enter, his head purposefully animated to swap angles to follow the player as we drink in his room. There are chains everywhere, in the background, in the forefront, and of course, the 4 main ones binding the Hollow Knight up, and this tells us 2 things. The first is that the Pale King was so terrified of the Radiance's power that he sealed it inside a magical tomb, sacrificing 3 of the world's most powerful beings in the process. The second is that the Hollow Knight himself is clearly so strong that he needed to be physically chained up on top of the magical seal in case he broke out, releasing the Radiance's infection. In his character design, he's the taller, broader, more monstrous version of our little knight, who, by this point in his journey, probably just wants a nap for goodness sake. Look at his little face. Our brother's cloak, which is snugly wrapped around ourselves, is ragged and a darker shade to our own. It presents him as in pain, presumably tortured for God knows how long by the Radiance. And this is the subtle stuff, because the more noticeable 2 aspects to his character, the crack in his skull and the missing arm, tell us that this powerful warrior has suffered greatly, and that he's lost a piece of himself both physically and mentally. It is a slight shame then that the final boss with the Hollow Knight feels almost anticlimactic compared to some of our previous battles. He has a diverse moveset with numerous phases. The misty, infected air is intoxicating in how it draws us into the importance of stopping our monstrous brethren. But I think it's safe to say I'm not alone when I mention that I probably struggled more with the Mantis Lords than the Hollow Knight himself. Perhaps my little knight was simply too strong, and my build was just right, focusing on nail arts and swordsmanship rather than spells. The absolute tragedy of the Hollow Knight stabbing himself, either trying to help us kill him to contain the infection or battling the Radiance's control, makes this battle more of a story moment than any of the other bosses before, and its pacing almost matches that of a 3-act structure in its own right. We have our sparring match against a warrior of imposing strength, then try to work with the knight to defeat the infection inside, before the Radiance takes over in full and he just tries to squash us. It's sensible then that as far as the base game is concerned, the true canonical ending to Hollow Knight gives us a true final boss against the Moth God herself, making the Hollow Knight just the starter to her main course. The idea of Hornet, ultimately the player's greatest link to any narrative details, leaping in at the last minute to reluctantly help the knight with his quest, despite telling us earlier that we were on our own, was enough to make any first-time player punch the air for a moment, and this sense of the final battle truly meaning something, despite the offhand storytelling, is capitalized on when the knight first looks out across the sky and challenges the Radiance. The fact the player A needs to actively choose to battle a god through challenging it, and B, the Radiance responds with a capitalized, full-screen title card to announce its presence, completely belittling any boss introduction before her, shows both her splendor, her arrogance, and her ability to completely wreck us. This battle is all about the platforming and the movement, completely counterbalancing the focus on raw strength, which benefits taking down the Hollow Knight quickly to reach her. Each boss has a very different charm build to give you the best shot, and for each try and try and try again, you need to muscle through smacking your brother about before facing her. The Radiance can seem unfair at first, testing your quick reflexes and almost always requiring you to jump in the air to get a hit in, putting you at a distinct disadvantage if you get too cocky or aren't keeping your wits about you to prepare for her next move. Her attacks are hardly ever telegraphed, because she has the same attack state, hover in the air and glow like the sun, meaning it's the arena you need to be watching. All of it. All this space. Defeating the Radiance leads to our Void Brethren, especially the Hollow Knight, flying up to give us a cheeky hand, and the little knight gains sentience, separate entirely from the player's control. It sheds its shell and takes on its void form so that we can blast our full strength onto the Radiance and kill it for good. Yeah, suck it, you fucking. But, whilst this is mechanically my favourite ending, seeing as we get a new boss fight and get to properly win the day, I kind of prefer one of the other endings in how it presents its tone. See, if Hornet jumps in to give us a hand, she yells at the knight to get good and we're expected to use the Dream Nail to access the Radiance ending. But if you don't think to do that and instead just use Hornet's distraction to cut down the Hollow Knight, this happens instead. The little knight embraces the Radiance in an effort to save Hallownest from the Radiance, and we make the noble sacrifice to eternally lock ourselves in the egg. It's Hornet who becomes our magical seal, but because she's locked away with us, there's no way we'll ever break out. The three siblings, battling together against impossible odds, end up succeeding in their quest, but their three stories end at once, abruptly locking them in the darkness. The depressive notion that Hornet isn't even dead, she's just knocked out, means that she'll need to live out her last days entombed with the corpse of one of her half-brothers and the other, our knight, forever locked in an eternal struggle against the Radiance. It still haunts me. This was the ending I first got. I didn't know about the Radiance. All I knew was that we had saved the day, but three of our main characters had made very different, though equally mournful, sacrifices to do so. Though, if Silksong is a sequel, like we suspect, this immediately makes this ending non-canon, right? It's interesting to say that because we keep hearing Team Cherry say that whatever ending you get is canon. But if Silksong is intended to be the next chapter in this world, Hornet's involvement in each of Hollow Knight's endings is distinctly different. In one ending, she's trapped in the egg forever. In another, she's come face to face with the Hollow Knight, either about to duel or form a kind of relationship. But because Hollow Knight feels so deliberate in its game systems, its storytelling and game loop, I firmly believe that they have it all planned out, despite the lore coming into the game long after they designed the world. Hollow Knight wasn't just a few interesting areas, bosses, and Metroidvania mechanics. If it was, it wouldn't have gained the astonishing popularity that it has. Good Metroidvanias have come before and others will come long after. It was its tone, its atmosphere, its characters, and for me, it was the first time in the 7 years of the 8th generation of video games I felt a game world that bled, that thanked me for participating in it, that scolded me for making the wrong decisions and not engaging with it. It was the passion and adoration and provided me with such an expansive space that I wanted to live in. I wanted to absorb. I wanted to learn so much about, despite being a vast, melancholic monster. It's not just that Hollow Knight has such a wealth of content, or that it's such a ridiculous value for money. It's that it made me feel rich for just getting to experience it. And that is why it's more than a Metroidvania. Thanks for watching. I'll be doing a shorter analysis of Undertale next before the year's out, and then it's, well, anybody's guess what January will bring. If you liked what you saw, like and subscribe, and while you're here, why not check out one of my other critiques or a sillier video where I make my girlfriend play Dark Souls. As always, take care.